Okay, this is Alex Toft, and this is an individual teacher development plan conference. Well, Alex, after looking over your plan, can you just kind of review with me your current goal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our professional development is kind of looking at creating a culture of success and having students take ownership. So I want to focus on that and how I can make really good assessments and really good classroom activities that allow students to take ownership of their own learning and to really kind of put themselves into it.
And when we looked at your plan, one of the areas of improvement we noted was Standard 5, which is using a variety of methods to monitor student learning. So, how have you and your American-led colleagues plan to help kids get more ownership of their work and maybe even assess both how they're learning collaboratively, because you use a lot of collaboration, and independently?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first thing I want to do is I want to focus on a lot of very independently directed things as well as collaborative. I want to move a little bit more towards some more independent work, because I see a lot of really good collaborative work going on, but I'm not seeing that kind of take the final leap into being their learning. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that there is that ownership, and I think by giving short shrift to that independent learning, I'm kind of skipping that part where it becomes ours but never mine. They never kind of internalize this is what I know now, and so I want to make sure that kind of reflects back onto them as well at the end. But also for the collaborative learning, we've talked about using like surveys, so they can think about themselves. How have they, how have I engaged in this lesson? Do I think that? Just asking them. Do I know what this target was hitting? Have I learned something today? Just these very simple questions that we can have them ask that'll give us some very formative and very personal feedback. As was I engaged? Was I involved? Did I do what I need to be doing? Just stuff like that that'll kind of reflect that back in the students, and we'll be able to see that. But they'll also be able to see that in that thought process, thinking about what they did. Well, that reflective action would be great as well for them to take more ownership of it.
So, do you and your two colleagues plan to create some of those means for students to assess their own learning, collaboratively together as a group, or do you already have those kinds of tools that you can use in your classroom?
Well, some basic models. I've been looking around for some basic models and stuff like that, but we haven't gotten together. But I do want to, because I want to see what other teachers are looking for. As a first-year teacher, I want to kind of get that window into what a more experienced teacher has. Mm-hmm. So I want to see, what do you guys think is important, and what else should I be looking for? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I'd like to have as much help as possible in creating those to be, the best that I can actually make them. Beyond just sharing our materials, I want to make sure that I can take the best parts of that and add the best parts of mine, so that we can, have this real collaboration where there'd be a give and take in there as well. I want to be able to give as much as I can of my talents, and I want to be able to take on the best things you guys have as well.
And in looking at our professional development, work as a district, and specifically in our building, we've been talking a lot about some of those performance traits like grit or perseverance. Do you have any plans to help students take ownership of some of those performance traits as well, and assess how they're doing with those kinds of traits, with their independent tasks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of that is today we had kind of a recursive thing where I'm trying to make it somewhat reflexive as well, where they're I want them to kind of own up to the fact of this is what I know,
right.
And this is so. I had a question today on my test this is okay. Tell me everything you know about blank, and just had them kind of keep writing, almost using this sort of brain dump strategy that people often use just to activate that prior knowledge. Is the assessment. Tell me everything you got about this, and I'm a little torn on that because it might just be a lot of regurgitation, but I want them to be as creative and as academic with it as possible. So I encourage them to use that sort of academic vocabulary, but also with that that ties back into the grit and taking ownership. Is that I want them to look at what they're doing. I working on because that was one of my best learning experiences in college, was having one of my very first a little reading quiz in my American Lit class actually. Oh man, I didn't think about that. Echoes and echoes. But yeah, there's and I just asked these very basic questions about the readings we had to do, and I couldn't answer like 2 out of 3 of them. And I just felt ashamed of myself. I was being, you know, and then the next time I didn't, because I mean it put that responsibility back on me. And so I want them to see that that's not going to sink their grade. I mean, it's going to. I just want them to be aware that, you know, we know what they're doing. They need to be aware of what they're doing, and they have to be there to play as well.
So once you and your colleagues collect some of that kind of formative data, you know, from those student self-assessments, what do you plan to do with it?
I haven't decided yet. I'm wondering if I want to do something as basic as like a grade, or just have some sort of. I was thinking about doing a Google form and then comparing, like having them take just a basic survey coming up next few weeks, and then towards the end of the class, having them evaluate not only my teaching process, but and the class and the material, but also evaluate how do you think you've changed? Do you think you've gained something? Do you think that you've gotten to be a better reader, writer? How do you think you become more persistent? You know, what qualities have we been encouraging in you? I want them to think about that reflectively as well.
And in terms of collaborating with your peers, I know that from our post-conference you talked about how you're using a concept-based framework to work collaboratively with your same course colleagues to create these units. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, your goal of continuing that work, and how does that framework help you design assessments, both formative and summative, that you think are quality assessments?
Well, I love the concept-based, because it gives me a lot of kind of benchmarks that you should hit. You know, there's the ideas like we're looking at our deism unit now is like we have to at some point kind of discuss, maybe perhaps we compared Christian theism and we compared deism to one another. And so I gave them a series of our kind of words that we use for both of them, and I had them kind of sort those out and explain why they put each one, like words like creation and design, and progress, perfection, morals and ethics, just these ideas, where do they think each one of these lie? And I got those words, of course, from our benchmarks there. So I can use the correct vocabulary that's being used across the curriculum. I can focus on these very pertinent ideas to the unit, but I had the freedom to bring in whatever I'd like. I mean, you did Thomas Paine, I did John Locke, which is technically a Brit, but still the ideas were really important because we could take those right into Declaration of Independence. So I'm able to focus on this very concise through line. And so I'm not taking things off, and I'm just kind of going over here. I'm using this story to teach, you know, our elements of characterization. Instead, I'm looking towards a much more academic curriculum, really much more academic knowledge.
And what kind of response have you gotten from your students so far about the curriculum itself?
They think it's harder because we have to make them learn something, and there's actual knowledge they have to internalize and understand in order to use it and apply it to this. So there's an extra step they're not used to in English, where they're used to reading the story, learning about something, looking back at the story and seeing where this certain literary device comes up. Well, now we have, you know, we give them some front loading, and there's this information that they have to use and apply over and over again. And so it's harder because they're being required to learn things at a much greater pace and at a much more deeper level than they have been before. And they've been noticing that it's tougher that way, and that there's a lot more heavy content.
Yes. And I know we've talked before about how we've gotten some, you know, the three of us have gotten some sort of baseline data from looking at actual student writing to make some general observations about where are they strong, where are they not so strong, and where do they really need help. Do you have plans in the future to work more with that data too, in terms of your writing instruction, where you're going to go next with your writing instruction?
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of things that I do. I do in mini lessons before. We do like a much more major writing thing. And now we're getting into much more formal writing kind of towards the end of the semester. Yeah, I'm going to totally kind of go back, and I've got a list of a lot of just kind of basic grammar tenets. I want to get them to, starting of course with possessives, because that's going to have to happen soon.
Yes, and we have had conversations, you know, the three of us, about that is a common error that we're seeing. And in our collaborative work, we've been able to identify not only that, but even basic things like capitalization. So those are targets for some of your skills lessons coming up, as well as probably mine and Kyle's too.
I'd like to, I know, and that's one thing I'd like to look at. That is, I'd like to have a more directed formative assessment on specifically on grammar, because I want to kind of separate what they do know and just don't do, whether it's an issue of kind of attention or if it's an
Yes.
issue of do they just not know how to
Right.
explain that something is possessive, or is it just
Right.
that they don't do it because their phones will do it for them.
Right,
Yeah.
and it sounds like that would fit right into students, taking more ownership of what is it I do know but just neglect to use, and what is it I really don't know, and I need, the teacher to go back and reteach some of those things. I think that's an excellent idea. Well, as you've talked about your plans to help students implement, or to use those kinds of tools to help them assess their own learning and to take more ownership. And you've talked about how you plan to continue collaboration with concept-based units. Those seem to be like two of the major goals, for next semester. So at the end of the year, if you had to, push past the end of first semester and think about the end of the year, what would you hope, you would have accomplished at that point? Where do you think you'll be? I know.
I would like to see a classroom that's very strongly academic in my class. I want to see my classroom as being a place where students will use appropriate vocabulary and they'll use kind of these rhetorical strategies correctly. I want to see like the mind at work in my classroom. So that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to encourage their thinking, but I'm trying to push them in a way so that it will be a very intelligent and a very academic space. And so that's kind of where I want to be. I want to, be a bit more Tweety about it. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping for. So I'm hoping for it to become a much more academic and a much more rigorous place. I want to have students, I think that seeing students that are willing to work and put in time, I want to see that result there. I want to, see their development in my teaching that will support my students in being superbly academic students.
Well, we will visit again towards the end of the year, and we'll see if you want to create a new goal for next year or if you want to stick with the same one. So
Awesome,
I
great.
thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks.